Well, welcome back to the Finding Something Real podcast, friend. This is your...
I'm trying to center myself.
Are we even in focus? I can't even tell. I can't tell.
There we are. There I can tell.
Okay, here we go.
Let's go. Let's do it.
Welcome back to the Finding Something Real podcast, friend. This is your host, Janelle Wood, and I'm here today with a very good friend of mine, Katie Dommel. Katie, hi.
Hello.
I told Katie that she had to smile, and it's what time is it where you're from originally?
What time is it here?
Oh wait, it's later over there. Yeah. You have no excuse. I thought it was earlier.
I'm just tired.
Anyway, Katie's been part of the Finding Something Real journey for the last 6 years, and so she's here in town, and I was really excited, and I said, hey, would you join me for this very first episode to kind of overview what we're doing with Finding Something Real? And she said yes, and it wasn't reluctant, so I don't feel bad that you're here right now.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
Okay, good. I'll buy you coffee after this. Okay. So anyway, I went on sabbatical after December of last year, and this is the first episode that we've recorded that's going out this year. And a lot has happened between then and now, and I'll probably share more in writing later and behind the scenes stuff on Instagram. Which, by the way, if you don't follow us on Instagram, you can search Finding Something Real. And my friend Raina, who is editing this video, our friend Raina, who's amazing, our friend.
She's amazing.
Yeah. She's amazing. She's going to be joining me over there once a week to kind of recap the different episodes that go out. And we're really excited for those conversations, and you're going to love Raina. She's amazing, and she's a huge help to this season of the podcast. So shout out to Raina, who is incredible. He's fun.
Golf clap.
Yeah. We are excited to be here because if you are a regular listener of Finding Something Real, or if you're just joining us for the first time, you probably remember or know that Finding Something Real is about finding something real with Jesus, restoration, eternity, authenticity, and love. And the premise of the podcast has always been invitation. Maybe I'm talking to somebody, a young woman or whoever it is who's not sure about relationship with Jesus Christ. And it's invitation to deeper conversations about, hey, is this guy for real? Is he legit? And can we trust him? And that's produced over the years some really beautiful conversations. Katie, I was so excited that you were here because in 2019, when this podcast started, even before that, you were a huge cheerleader behind the scenes, encouraging me and praying with me and talking with me about what this might look like. And that was before we started bringing on young women to share their stories. It was back when I was just gonna interview guests who had stories about finding something real with Jesus. And you were the first person who said, hey, like, why don't you reach out and get an intern for this? And you've just been a huge part of this all along the way. Yeah. And then this past summer, when things started to shift, after a number of months of just praying and asking God for direction and laying this ministry down, to be honest, some people started to reach out, and including some of the people that you are going to hear about here in a minute. And I reached out to Katie here, and I said, Katie, I have this big idea of bringing all these girls together in person before we even start the podcast this year. And you're a videographer, and you're the only person I know well enough to ask, but would you come out here from the Midwest and help create this vision? And is it even possible? And you said, sure. And I was like, well, I don't know how much I can pay you. And you were like,
don't pay me.
And I was like, okay. And so anyway, that ended up, we got together in August, myself and what ended up being 8 beautiful young women with different stories, who came together and shared their questions. And we just dialogued, all of us together. And Katie was behind the scenes recording, working like crazy. Shout out to my niece in law, Sarah Bronsky, who just did an incredible amount of work, both in the branding that you see this season and doing photography and working with you. And then Kaylee, a different Kaylee than the one we're going to introduce you to today, who was there helping out and just doing a ton of work. So just there, what's happened over the last few months, first in a few months of rest, and then in the last few months of a lot of work behind the scenes, it's just God has brought an incredible group of people, who are now working on this ministry, including Raina, who you'll see in some of the videos, and hopefully she'll join in quite a few of the conversations too as we invite guests on. But then also Anna, who's worked with Finding Something Real before, working on social media. Again, Sarah Bronsky, who's helping with the branding, Katie, who's done a ton of work with the videography and photography as well, along with Sarah, and then my daughter Naomi, who's now, a teenager and is helping schedule guests. So, like, amazing things are happening. And then that's not even to talk about all the other stuff. And so, if you want to hear more about what's happening with Finding Something Real behind the scenes, including our work towards becoming a 501c3 and some fundraising that we're doing, as well as like prayer support. And if you're somebody who wants to be part of what's happening here and wants to know the ins and outs, I don't want to bore whoever's listening with all the details, but you can go to findingsomethingreal.com and hear more about that. Click on at the bottom of the page, I think it says support or something like that, or get involved. And there's a lot more information about that on here. So I cannot believe this is season 8 of the podcast. And what comes to mind when you think about how far this podcast has come? Because it's been a journey. It's been a journey.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think of how it started as something that kind of felt like a vision that God had given you that you weren't really sure what to do with, and didn't feel qualified, especially with the tech aspect, or just a lot of the different pieces that need to come together to make something like this successful. And I think as I've walked with you throughout the years, I just feel like you've been so faithful with something that you definitely didn't come up with on your own. It's not something that I think you would have enjoyed just doing because for the sake of it. It's not something to promote yourself or anything like that. And it's been just an obedience. I've seen God provide in some amazing ways for Finding Something Real that have even increased my faith. And now I feel like it's turned a corner and become something even bigger and something new that I still feel like God is just really breathing life into it. And you're still walking that road of obedience and being faithful with what He's given you.
I hope so. I agree with you. Like, I think over the last few months, especially, you and I have talked many times about the pillar of stones that the Israelites had when God would do something amazing. As is shared in the Old Testament, the Israelites would make these piles of stones to remember what God had done. And just in the last few months, like even last month, I was writing down, I think you told me to do this, but you were right, to write down like a gratitude list, like of things that God has done, and to remind me of where He's shown up over and over again. And there's like, 50 gazillion names that I could go off of right now, like Tara, Brian, Anna, like all these different people who've helped, all the guests that have been on. It's just been incredible how things have worked together. And so, yeah, as it became clear this past summer that things were turning a corner, yeah, this beautiful young woman reached out to me at the end of April And she said, hey, I know you're on sabbatical, but when you're done, would you consider doing the podcast with me as a co-host on your podcast? Because um, I would like to share my story. And that was Sarah. And Sarah is one of the girls that's going to be on the podcast this season. I didn't know her. I told her, like, hey, I've been praying for direction, and I think this might be part of God's provision, but I don't know what to do. And then yeah, like a month later, I was talking to my niece who, for various reasons, we haven't really had a deep relationship over the last 7 years, or even before that, 'cause she was just a little girl. And I said, hey, I'm thinking of starting the podcast again. Would you be interested? And she was like, yeah. There was no hesitation. And it was incredible. And that's my niece, Frankie, who will also be on the podcast this season. And then I, way back when, when we first moved to Chelan in 2017, 2018, I had become friends with a high schooler and actually a bunch of high school girls that I would take to a local ministry, Delight, for weekly, small group time. And we used to sing in the car together and do all this stuff. And anyway, she's in college, or she went to college. She came back from college. She's an artist now. And we went for a walk, and I just said, hey, Kaylee, would you want to do this if I started again? And she said yes. And last season, season 7, we only had 3 co-hosts. So I was like, oh my gosh, well, there's 3 already. And then God brought 5 more girls. One of those is Raina, who is going to be helping more behind the scenes and sharing on Instagram. But it's just incredible to me that God has done all that. And these beautiful stories and young women who came together to share. And I just kind of wanted to give you a preview. So what's a little different this season is we got together in person. You flew all the way from Nebraska to Washington State.
Yes.
What was that like?
Like a normal flight.
So one of the girls, when I asked for feedback about the retreat, she's like, and I'm not going to paraphrase her correctly. So Sarah, I'm sorry if I get this wrong, but it was so cute because she wrote something like, no one seemed to really understand what was going on, but they were super excited to be there. And did you feel that way?
I think that was true at first.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think pretty quickly everyone just kind of became a little family.
Mm-hmm.
It was crazy because everyone had very different backgrounds and stories and questions about God, different levels of faith, or no faith, and still everyone bonded very quickly. Mm-hmm. It was very special. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was Monday night through Wednesday morning, and it was too short. If we do a retreat again, I think it's going to have to be at least one more day longer. But these girls, most of them didn't know each other at all. Mm-hmm. And they all came, like you said, from different places and experiences, but it was really beautiful. And so in the past, over the last few seasons, Finding Something Real starts with me having a conversation with a young woman, and then throughout the next number of episodes, we're reaching out to guests and we're inviting them on to go deeper with those questions or objections or just topics that she's brought up. And we're still going to do that. But what we're going to change this season, and why I felt like this was probably important, we'll show you some clips from that retreat. I want you to see what happened and maybe even some conversation that happened that Raina can share here. But also, we're still going to do the one-on-one conversations. In fact, I just got done recording all of those, and we'll give you a little preview of that.
So I hope that somebody is listening like me who could hear that it's normal to have doubt, and it doesn't mean that they're left out.
I'd probably ask something like along the lines of what makes Christianity the correct religion. Mm-hmm. And there's so many.
Mm-hmm. What's different about it?
Yeah.
I think what's kind of anchored me when I don't necessarily feel his presence, or I don't feel him working in the way that I would like him to, or as fast as I would like him to. It's been really important to just remind myself of his character. And even though maybe I can't feel it or can't see it yet, I think his character is what really grounds me and really reminds me that, well, when he's faithful.
When you've grown up like being a Christian, like it doesn't always feel like safe to ask those questions after a while, because you're like kind of expected to like know those things. And so I kind of imagine someone who has those questions that like they just don't want to like maybe verbally say, and it's just like something that's been on their heart. So maybe this is a way that they can learn about it or hear that they're not alone in that question.
Being able to like find something authentic and find something, relate to the like doubts that people have, that we may have, that questions that we have, and know that that's normal. We're human. We're gonna question things. We're gonna doubt things, and maybe it's nice to hear that no matter where you are, you're heard, and maybe it doesn't feel like it, but there is someone out there who's willing to listen.
I kind of tend to come from a more reserved place, but I think lately I kind of ask myself the question of like, well, like why hold back? Like if I love Jesus, like I should like practice talking about him unabashedly.
I think, like, what is the point of a relationship with your creator if not to enjoy it and like to relish in that and really sit in the fact that like you're loved and seen and noticed and heard and all the things. And so I think if anything from that specific season, like that's what I learned most and what I'm really passionate about, because from my questioning and like my own doubt, I found that. And yeah, I would just love for other people to experience that.
So when I look at my own suffering and the suffering of those around me, the cross is what roots me in knowing that like even if I can't make sense of the agony that I'm walking through, the cross shows me that like death always turns to resurrection. Darkness always turns to light.
I hope that if you listen here, you'll find a place of empathy, warmth, and where we're pursuing something real, restoration, eternity, authenticity, and love. I've found that in Jesus Christ. I don't expect people to agree with me. Don't take my word for it. But let's go on a quest together and check it out. And it's been really beautiful thus far. And this is probably one of my favorite things that I've ever done. And I can't believe we get to do this. So praise the Lord. Let's go. So from now until probably mid-June, you're going to be hearing from each one of these young women who came and shared their stories at this retreat. They shared briefly, and we had this beautiful conversation all together. But then we've gone deeper with these deeper conversations. So next week, you're going to hear from the very first one. And then we're going to start having guests on to talk deeper about these issues. And it's not going to be chronological. So some of the questions that come up, you'll be like, wait a second, Frankie didn't ask that, or Kaylee didn't ask that, or whatever. But there are going to be questions that matter to at least one of them. And what we're finding is they matter to more than just one. A lot of the questions are appropriate for all of them, not just one. Do you want to speak to that? Yeah.
Well, I wanted to shift the conversation a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Because I think that this is related, though.
Okay.
I think that I would love to hear your perspective on, especially right now with a lot going on in the world. Why do you think that creating a space for honest conversations about faith is so important, and what kind of impact it can have for the kingdom?
I feel like you could answer that in a really beautiful way. This is okay. Okay. Yeah. It's pretty obvious that we live in a very polarizing culture where we do an us versus them thing. And I think it happens in the church often, where we talk about non-believers or people who are questioning faith or who are struggling with faith as a them out there, instead of recognizing that a lot of times it's in here. It's in the church. It's people who we sit next to, who maybe have things that they're wrestling with or questions that they have. maybe their best friend is one of those thems out there, and so I feel like the language of our culture sometimes infiltrates the church, that sometimes we and not always, but I think you don't have to go very far on social media to see how polarizing conversations can be, and how we're constantly preaching to the choir instead of reaching out past, to the people who are hurting, and to the people who maybe feel like they're sitting in the proverbial back pew of the church, wondering like if I'm going to stay or am I going to go. And not all of the young women who came on the podcast this season would fit into that. Some of them are super strong in their faith. They have a deep desire to run with what they have and share what they have with the world. But they still, as we all do, wrestle with questions and different things and lies that start to entangle. I think finding something real in Jesus is a lot of combating fake news about who Jesus is. And if Jesus is the most important thing, as we know as believers he is, then it's really important that we're able to have conversations with people who don't agree with us. And sometimes that looks like a long haul of conversations. It looks like having a retreat where we invest in people who come. And maybe it looks like, the shepherding of inviting a bunch of girls from different perspectives to different conversations that we're going to have. And I do feel really passionate about that. I think that, um, evangelism and sharing our faith is about being willing to humble ourselves and meet people where they're at. And so I don't know, there's like at least one girl on the podcast this season who's not a believer at all. Another girl who, and when I say girl, I don't mean that in a demeaning way. Hopefully I can be called a girl too, but like a young woman who, another young woman who is really struggling with the certainty of faith. And I just think we learn a lot from people when they're open and honest about their struggles. I think we learn a lot from each other when we're vulnerable about what we're struggling with and being authentic about our imperfections and our doubts. Yeah, so I could just go on and on about that. I was not prepared for that conversation. You tell me, how would you answer that? You're very articulate.
Well, just speaking from my own personal experience, I struggled with doubt and I had a lot of questions that I felt a lot of shame for having. And I kept them hidden because I thought that having questions meant that I had no faith. And I struggled with that for a very long time until I was in my mid 20s and I was having kids. And I found a good church that welcomed that kind of conversation. And I think most people don't find that kind of church or don't find that kind of community that creates a safe place. And what you've done is you've created that safe place where people can ask those questions, because I think that's part of working out our salvation. And I think that's part of, um, you know, understanding who we are in Jesus. It is confronting a lot of the stuff in ourselves that, um, we have to decide we want to lay that down. And is that something that needs to die? Or is that something that, needs to be part of who I am? There's just so many things inside of us that, in our minds, especially, that, um, it's all, I get, it's all part of that, renewing your mind. It's taking every thought captive. But I don't think that's, just a personal one-on-one thing. I think we need to do that with each other. And God created us for community. He created us to be in relationship with each other and with Him. And so part of that is conversation, and part of that is asking questions.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because we live with a lot of lies in our culture, and some of them are blatant, and I think um, sometimes we call out those lies as we should at the church, but some of them are very insidious. Lies about identity, lies about whether, this little thing that I'm doing in the kingdom even matters. I think as long as the enemy can keep us captive with lies, um, then it impedes our effectiveness for the kingdom, you know? And I think the more we can speak about the things that we're struggling with, like, hey, this is like, this isn't right. I know it's not right, but how now is this a safe place for me to share the struggle I'm having? The more that we can expose what the enemy would love to keep in the dark to the light. And I just feel that that's really important. And another thought I had while you were talking is just, I love this line, like, you know, ideas have consequences and bad ideas have victims. And I think when we look at people not as our enemy if they think differently than us, but somebody who is maybe captive by, you know, an ideology that is completely anti-Jesus and anti the way, the truth, and the life, right? Like, it's a lot easier to have conversations and to engage in this stuff because like I was telling one of the girls this season, like, I'm not afraid of whatever objection you have. It doesn't like it doesn't shake my faith. Throw anything, throw anything out because let's expose it. Because God is God all the time, and He can handle the craziest stuff. And so, yeah,
I'd agree with that. That when you take something and you just put light on it, you can see it for what it is.
Mhm.
So if it's something that's good, then you can see that. And if it's something that is a lie, or that is something that's more rooted in darkness, you can see that too.
Yeah.
And that's all you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, why these conversations matter, just finally, I guess, is, you know, several of these young women wanted to come forward just to give voice to somebody else who might be struggling with similar things. Maybe they feel more victory in their life right now over some of this stuff, but they wanted to be honest about some of the struggles that they've had. I would say a number of them are walking in victory, but they also have, you know, those hangups that we all do. And so by being honest about them, they want other people to see that there's hope for them too, which I love. Yeah. So I'm really excited that we're going to be talking with Frankie. Frankie's passionate about Jesus. She's been to Africa on a mission trip. She's all in. She's going to Christian college, and yet she still wonders things like, what does daily discipleship look like? And isn't that something we can all relate to? And questions about reading the Bible and what does it mean to deal with the stereotypes that people have towards Christians, and how do we respond to that in a loving way? We're going to be talking to Caitlin. Caitlin is not a believer, and her friend Kaylee invited her here. She has real questions about the Bible, science, and the reputations of Christians as well. And her courage in speaking honestly was amazing. And I think, especially if you wrestle with Jesus and even believing in any of this, maybe you're watching this because somebody sent you this podcast. I think you're going to love hearing from her. And she opens up a lot of great conversation because of her really honest questions. She kept on saying, I don't want to offend anybody. And then she was completely honest, and I just so appreciated that. And then her friend Kaylee is also sharing her story, a young woman whose heart beats for her friends who don't share her faith. She's asking, how do I stay rooted while loving people who see things so differently? How do I know what God wants for me? We're going to be talking with Anna. Anna sharing about her journey through grief, the loss of her father, and her questions about the spiritual realm and how to love people who don't believe as well. Her honesty and her faithfulness in my life have been such a gift, and I can't wait for you to hear more of her story. We're going to be talking with Christy, and Christy loves Jesus. And she opens up some great conversation about relationships, anxiety, and discernment. What does faithfulness look like when you feel uncertain in your life? Great questions. We're going to be talking with Janine. Her story is so powerful. She's experienced years of chronic suffering, and she's had, you know, a crisis of faith, and yet today she's clinging to the hope in Jesus. But her questions are real. She wants to know, how can her story help teach us about God's presence in pain. What does it mean to deal with suffering day after day, and to hold God's promises about living an abundant life with Him on one hand, and then feeling like she's living in survival mode in the other. We're going to be talking with Sarah. She's someone who's hungry for truth, and yet she wonders, is that even something we can know? She listens to a lot of podcasts, but she's still very unsure. She's very articulate and has a lot of really great things to ask and question. And she's wondering, how do you sit with the tension of longing for certainty, but not having it? And she's got some great questions, as well as some concerns that she has about the character of God. And I think that those questions are going to really open up a lot of great conversations as well. When this airs, Lord willing, we'll already have recorded a number of episodes with guests, but that's already scheduled. We have some scheduled right now as we're recording this a month before time or beforehand. And I just am so excited for the people who are saying yes to coming on and talking with these young women. And for these young women, all of whom I couldn't say enough great things about them, the fact that they came forward and shared and are just willing to open up so that others can maybe experience some light as a result of what they're exposing to the darkness, or exposing from the darkness. And for some of them, the things that they've just wrestled with for a long time, or just things that may seem everyday, but that are real and that should be talked about. So I'm excited. As we wrap up here, what do we hope the listener will experience this season? What do you think, Katie?
I think that there's a lot of people that are questioning things about the world and also curious about who God is and which representation of Him is the right representation of Him that they see, especially in American culture or in Western culture. And so I think this is going to be a very interesting season, because there's a very wide variety of young women who have interesting questions, deep questions, the kind of questions that we all really ask, but inside and don't voice a lot of the time. And I think that there's a lot of people that have these questions. I think that these girls they go from extremely skeptical to very in love with Jesus. And so there's going to be somebody on this podcast this season that is going to ask the questions that you're having, that anyone is having.
Yeah.
And there's going to be someone that lines up pretty closely to pretty much anyone. So,
yeah. I also hear sometimes from older women like myself, or even older, who say, well, it's not really, that podcast isn't really for me, but I listen. No, this podcast is for you. I can't tell you, I've had quite a few people who've mentioned, that this podcast has helped them in some way. Whether they're even a woman, sometimes I hear from men who are listening as well. And I think that, like you said, there's a space for everybody, but also my prayer is that these conversations would model some deep conversations that maybe at times we're afraid to have with the people in our life. We can't always sit down with a Christian apologist or pastor and ask all these like super deep questions, right? And get these answers, but we can glean from their wisdom. We can sit down with our loved ones and ask questions. I've shared this quote many times on the podcast, but it's one of my favorites, by a guy named David Augsburger. And he says, being heard is so close to being loved that to the average person, it's basically indistinguishable. And I think that we can all listen to the people in our lives and pray for them and encourage them and point them in the direction of Jesus. And yeah, I'm really excited for what's going to happen in the weeks to come. The plan is to be airing weekly episodes starting now through probably mid-June. And so if you, again, are interested in knowing more about Finding Something Real, findingsomethingreal.com. Our links to our social media are on there. And if you would like to be involved in praying or financially supporting this ministry, you can find out more on there as well. under Get Involved. And Katie, I just love you. And as we wrap up here, I'll ask you the question that I've asked you before, but I always ask at the end. Finding Something Real is designed to talk about finding something real with Jesus. As Christians, we believe that He alone offers true restoration, eternity, authenticity, and love. Which of those things stands out to you the most in your life right now, and why?
Well, I can think of examples of all of them. My first instinct was to choose eternity because I feel like God is teaching me that eternity starts now and that I can have a life of abundance and a life that is the kingdom life that Jesus talks about so many times in the New Testament. He's very clear that it's at hand. It's right now. But I think restoration is the one that stands out the most because God is crazy and he does things that you don't see coming sometimes. And so, yeah, restoration. Sometimes you're not even asking for restoration, but he's such a good father and he is such a loving and kind God, so close to us. And sometimes it's hard to remember that because he's so big, he's so powerful, he created everything. And it's hard to remember how intimately he wants to be involved in our lives and how intricately he inserts himself into our life if we allow him to. And when we do allow him to, then he can move in crazy ways. So, and that includes restoring dreams and desires that you thought were long dead. So he's good.
Yeah, he's writing a crazy story. We'll talk more about that later. To be continued. Thank you so much for joining us today. Can't wait until next week when you get to meet my niece, Frankie. Until next time.